Hey everyone, happy that you're joining us for today's conversation. We'll give everyone just a couple minutes to join. I'm watching the participant count go up. It's really exciting. Watching. All right, I'm going to start to kick us off. The participant count will start, we'll keep going up, but we'll get going. So today's discussion is the infrastructure of continuing education, building the bridge to future enrollment. And a couple of housekeeping notes as we get going. Um, Within 24 hours after the end of the webinar, you'll get an email with a link to the recording and the deck and all the information from the webinar. So that will all come to you within 24 hours. The other big piece of housekeeping is that this is going to be a conversation. I'll have our speakers introduce themselves in a minute, but this is a conversation. And to have this conversation, we want you to use the Q&A panel, the Q&A box. So please put your questions in the Q&A as we go on, and I will try to get your questions to Cindy and Peter as we go, and I'll remind you of that. Okay, let's go on to next slide. Just a quick overview of what our agenda is. We're going to do introductions and an opening. Then we're going to talk about common pitfalls, practical strategies, tech considerations, and we'll have a closing in Q&A, and we'll end promptly at the end of the hour. Okay, so introductions. So before I ask Cindy and Peter to introduce themselves, I just want to give a little background to this. So first of all, I'll introduce myself. I'm Josh Kim. I'm Assistant Provost for Online Learning Strategy here at Dartmouth College. And I also write the Learning Innovation column for Inside Higher Ed. Speaking of Inside Higher Ed, I want to thank Inside Higher Ed for convening this community. And I'd like to also thank Form Assembly for supporting this conversation and for recruiting Cindy and Peter as our panelists. Okay, speaking of our panelists, we have some great speakers today. I'm going to ask Cindy and Peter to introduce themselves. And Cindy, when you start, I'm going to ask you, who you are, what your job is, and what are some of your goals for this conversation together?
Sure. Great. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have this conversation. I'm Cindy Craig. I'm a teaching associate professor at the University of Denver's College of Professional Studies. And I think it's relevant to know that a couple of things. I took a fairly circuitous path into my faculty role. I spent over 20 years in marketing with a focus on strategy and like marketing analytics. So that means I came into higher ed already thinking in terms of customer journeys, decision systems, and data that informs action. Another interesting fun fact, my dissertation focused on qualitative learner experience data. So the kind of data institutions have, but don't capture or use in decision making, particularly at the leadership level. So my background deeply shapes how I teach and how I think about continuing ed. My lens today is really shaped by industry, data, and learner experiences. And that shows up in how I think about infrastructure, what we're talking about today. So, Josh, my goal, I guess, is to whatever I can do to normalize the challenges and pain points that we are all experiencing around implementation and scaling programs that best meet learners' needs.
That's fantastic, Cindy. Appreciate that. Okay, Peter, same question. Who are you, and what are your goals for this conversation today?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Welcome, everyone. Good to see so many people here on the attendee list. I'm Peter Bernardi, CEO and co-founder of Elevate Actual. We're a higher education focused implementation firm, typically working on the Salesforce platform with tools like Form Assembly as well. My background is not nearly as impressive as Cindy's. I've only been working in higher ed and on the technology side for 1 decade, only 10 years. But I've learned a lot, seen all sorts of implementations and use cases on the system side. So definitely will lean on Cindy for programmatic and the higher ed lens. And I can kind of chime in and sprinkle a little bit over the top when it comes to the actual technology, the pitfalls, not necessarily of long-term program scaling, but of short-term tech implementations that then cause long-term scaling issues. I think my goal is learn from Cindy. Her and I talk all the time, but it's great to have it in a formalized process here, other than us just texting back and forth. And B is kind of share if there are folks on the call that are looking at implementations. I won't have all the answers, but I definitely have a lot of questions that you can ask, and making sure that you're looking out for what phase 2, 3, and 4 might entail that you can still address in phase 1.
All right, Peter, that's fantastic. And I also agree, my background's not as impressive as Cindy either. Okay, I think you guys
Stop
are
it.
the perfect combination to have us all go into this conversation. So again, this is a conversation, and to start out, we have a couple poll questions that we want to learn from all of you a bit. So why don't we kick off the first poll question? And we'll give you a few seconds here. All right. Most of you are answering. All right. And here are the results. So what is your institution using to manage student data? SIS is the smallest, and both is the biggest. I just want to, Peter, when you look at this, any quick reaction to these poll results?
I love the 19% truth speakers that really don't know that are here, just to absorb. I think across most institutions, it's usually both. Legacy, SIS, CRM coming together, integration. We'll do a little tease for later. Is always a joy. But yeah, not super surprised that both is high up there, and not super surprised that about 1/5 of people aren't sure.
Yeah. Cindy, anything surprising from you?
No, that's about what I would expect. I agree with Peter that I really appreciate the folks that are like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's messy on our campuses. All right, next poll.
Oh, this would be a good one.
Yeah.
Let's see if that unsure is still 19%. It's probably going to be higher, I would imagine.
Yeah. We'll see what the betting markets say about this.
I think we could do a whole webinar just with Peter talking about whatever the response is to this poll.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, probably multiple, given the journey that Education Cloud has been on.
Yeah.
But
All
we're
right,
going to
so
stay on topic.
That's
yeah,
right.
we're going to be good. But let's look at this. Yeah, unsure is the biggest. All right, Peter, we'll just give you any running hot takes on these results.
Yeah, not super surprised. Unsure is higher. Honestly, impressed that 18% are on EdCloud. We did our first EdCloud implementation in late 2022. So if anyone else on the call also started EdCloud in late 2022, you know what a non-linear path that has been. But yeah, no, good to see that it is basically split roughly a third, Salesforce, something else, not sure. But yeah, pretty impressed that 18% are already on EdCloud.
All right, awesome. All right, let's go to our Stuart, let's go to our first slide here. Excellent. Okay, the way this is going to work is we're going to put up some slides, and then we're just going to have a quick conversation about the slides. We're not going to read them, but I think that the headline here is learners have moved on, but the infrastructure hasn't. And here we're talking about non-degree certificate programs that all of our universities are trying to do, and the infrastructure is all over the place. So in looking at this idea that learners have moved on, but our infrastructure is not, let's take a step back. And Cindy, I want to ask you, what do you think has changed most about continuing education learners today? What's different?
You know, they're they're comparing us against everything, not just other universities. It has gotten to be a very complicated and like noisy marketplace, and it just means that they can be more discerning, they can be more price sensitive, and increasingly they are able to be more outcome oriented, but we're all actually being forced to be more outcome oriented, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a reality that we need to address. Pre-pandemic, yeah, I think that there was more employer funded learning. At least that's what we're seeing. And now things are more self-funded. That means that learners are a little bit more risk aware when it comes to the outcomes. There's a little bit more urgency behind it. And so I think the landscape has just gotten a whole lot more complex. And when there's friction, learners don't complain, they leave. They just find something else.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's definitely true. I mean, on all our campuses, the number of certificates has gone up just so much, and we're trying to deal with these new learners. But I want to pick up on friction. So you said when there's friction, they just leave. Peter, can you talk a bit about this? What does it mean from a learner's point of view? What does friction mean? What do you think about when you hear Cindy talk about the issue of friction?
Yeah, I think especially with the focus of infrastructure, is outdated technology when it comes to applying for, hearing back from, interacting with, or just directly purchasing. It's a good point. Josh, you made like the number of certificates is blowing up. To Cindy's point, everyone has to be more outcome oriented. So they're asking themselves, I'm viewing this beautiful marketing page that I have here. When I click register, when I click apply, when I click add to cart, what happens? Because if that experience is super jarring and you go from an awesome Drupal, WordPress, what have you website into now a terrible application experience, like people notice, right? Like no longer are these bad application experiences or purchase experiences, what we're finding super top of mind recently in some of our projects. Like it has to meet standard e-commerce. Like you're being compared to Amazon, right? To Cindy's point, the shopping experience, the recommendations, the content. It's not, am I going to go to DU for this professional certification or go to some other higher ed institution? There's Udemy, there's all sorts of other micro-credential type sites out there whose sole purpose is to drive revenue and top line funnel generation. So for like the friction is usually not necessarily how do we attract these learners to our site, but how do we actually get them to convert? And I think schools need to be far more conversion focused and lower the barrier to entry a little bit. We obviously still are going to have our application experiences, requirements, review. We want to keep those robust standards, but make it really easy to apply. Make it one-click apply while chatting with an AI agent. Just be able to purchase it. If it's a non-credit cert, just purchase, type in your information, your credit card, and be done. There shouldn't have to be a ton of back and forth to get access to that content. Because to Cindy's point, right, like if they meet that friction, they're just gone. They're not going to give you another chance to impress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, or if they want it now and it's October, they're not going to wait. They're not going to wait until the next registration term starts up in January.
Yeah. Definitely true. And coming from a university, I know that there seems to be a delta, a gap between all the what learners expect on this slide and the reality on our campuses. So, Peter, just a quick follow up. Can you, for that gap between the reality and what learners expect, how big is that gap? Like, is my institution kind of unusual in Amnesty Gap, or is this sort of like what the ecosystem is now?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend campus to campus. And the biggest factor we see is just institutional priority. And typically we've kind of become within higher ed, more professional ed, continuing ed focus, because those are the groups that want to do cool new projects on Education Cloud with Commerce Cloud, Commerce on Core, and bring those new experiences forward, where continuing ed's in an interesting spot where they can typically, depending on the campus, have a little bit more latitude in what they own from a technology perspective, from their policies. Maybe those non-credit certificate purchasers, those learners don't need to be integrated back to the SIS. So awesome, we can implement this really nimble, fast solution and then have integration downstream. But typically, yeah, it is that the biggest blocker across campus, that gap is usually integration to some sort of legacy system, because that is pretty instantly a non-starter for a lot of these cool new projects that we're doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good lead in. All right, let's go on to the next slide about pitfalls here. All right, so here we list a number of pitfalls that our institutions are running into as these programs scale, as they're getting in more places, and we have varied infrastructure across our campuses to deal with our non-degree learners. So Cindy, I want to start with you here. Looking at these pitfalls, which ones do you see the most, and which of these pitfalls is like the most challenging to overcome, and where do you think you'd want to start?
Oh, they're all there, that's for sure. I mean, I think that the one that I feel and am aware of most acutely is I mean, I giggle a little at fragmented learner data. Well, I mean, that's like assuming you have learner data. I mean, I would add in parentheses non-existent or underutilized learner data across systems. I think that that's a huge one. I think that the manual work is really a problem, and then of course we've already kind of referenced, you know, these like this degree centric infrastructure being a problem. You know, I think that these each add friction at scale. Like the more that you try and scale your programs up, the bigger these problems become. And when it comes to manual work, I mean, that is just a non-starter. It just completely, it's game over when you start to scale. If you've been doing too much manually, and you don't figure it out until the problem has gotten too big for you to, I mean, it just explodes. Each of these also, they really hide this learner frustration, you know, just starts to just exists behind the scenes, and it ultimately erodes trust very quietly, like on the back burner. And so I think that it's, you know, back to the first one that I pointed to related to data. Often our most valuable learner data lives with one or two humans that's been talking to them, and that has got to change. It absolutely has got to change, and we have to stop forcing new models through old systems and then just acting surprised when it doesn't work and it breaks. But I would also, I would say that I would add pitfall number 5. I'm going to add to the list here that we just forget to think about the learner. We get so stuck in all of these processes, and the intention is we all are well intended. We're trying to do the right thing, but in the process, we totally forget about the learner experience. And so prioritizing that, I think, has got to be top of mind.
Yeah, I love that fifth one. So Peter, when we're talking about the growth of programs, what usually breaks first as programs grow?
Yeah, I think Cindy's spot on, where that data lives in two people's minds, and either A, doesn't get translated into the system, or B, I think it is, they're translating it into a system that can't scale with your needs. So I think really pitfall number 1 informs 2, 3, and 4, where if you're working within an antiquated SIS, which every SIS is antiquated at this point, you're trying to have a non-credit certificate program that has 6 or 7 starts a year fit into fall and spring. That doesn't happen, right? That's not reality. And then anyone who's actually applying for and going to that certificate program, they're talking to the one advisor for that, who may or may not have a stack of handwritten notes on his or her desk. And those stack of notes just sit there, right? To Cindy's point, this is assuming you even have that learner data in the right spot. But I think that the biggest blocker pitfall to continuing ed in particular, we've seen this a lot with our recent implementations, is that we're building this wonderful high-end commerce solution. People can come and just buy courses. It can totally revolutionize continuing ed. We're going to build it on Salesforce. We're going to layer in form assembly, have this really intelligent, snappy UIs and experiences. And then all of a sudden, right before that compliance layer, we have to give it back to this degree-centric SIS. And we have to translate all of these enrollments into course enrollments, which don't exist because it's a totally non-credit certificate program. Put them in a degree program, which also doesn't exist, and put them in a term that ends in the middle of one of these sessions. So I think truly it is number one that informs everything else. And if you can get away, and that's why I kind of mentioned it earlier, if continuing ed can exist on their own and maybe pioneer, because we've seen that honestly as a big leader across campus, is that continuing ed professional ed will say, hey, we're going to try this new cool thing over here. None of our students are qualified as students by the registrar. Getting to one of the questions that John asked in the chat is like, you have these non-credit learners. So do they belong in the SIS? Yes or no? The answer is kind of flexible. But most importantly, you can probably get away with not integrating it down to that system, at least for now. Prove out your case and then use that for more support across campus. Because those degree-centric systems just they can't even contemplate courses being across multiple terms. So if you have a 6-month certificate program that has 8 sessions instead of courses, that starts November 1st and ends late March, like that's not even possible to fit that in there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what we're getting at here is that these challenges that we have are really common across a wide variety of institution type. We're all facing these pitfalls. So all of us feel like we're just on our own, but we have some common themes. And as Peter said, we're starting to get questions in the Q&A saying that like, yep, this is where we have learner data in spreadsheets and it's all over the place. So I promise you in this conversation, we're going to get from like challenges to some ideas about how we can move forward. Okay, to start to do that, we're going to go on to Cindy's going to talk about a real world case. So Cindy, I want to give you a little time to talk about an experience that you've had.
Yeah, great. So I will just set the stage here for a minute. This is a real example that we're actively working through at the College of Professional Studies at DU. And it's around standing up a prior learning assessment or credit for prior learning, depending on what your vernacular is around that, a program. We call it PLA. And I really think that this is a powerful example to use here because it's really at this intersection of where skills, credential, data, and trust all kind of come together. And it has proven for us to be a stress test for institutional infrastructure, just where all of these things show up all at once. So adult learner, they come to us, they've got work experience, they've got certificate, they've got non-credit coursework, you name it. And they're asking a simple question. How does what I already know help me move forward faster, right? And where it breaks is we then ask the learners to decode what PLA even is. They don't understand, nor do they care. This is all on the back end, right? And that's kind of where it should stay, but it isn't where it lives. We're also asking them to understand why it costs what it costs. Why does it cost different to take these different pathways? And then we're asking them to navigate through what counts and what doesn't, all while they're juggling jobs, families, urgency. And so, like I said, that complexity really kind of needs to stay on the back end and not show up on the front end. PLA really shouldn't feel like an obstacle course, and so that's the challenge that we're trying to deal with. So, so it's navigating these degree and non-degree systems, manual review processes, and trying to figure out how to automate and streamline that. Trying to figure out where decisions are going to be stored about the PLA and the conversion and assessment of PLA. At the College of Professional Studies, we pride ourselves on being high touch. But again, back to what I was talking about with data and what Peter was talking about with the systems and infrastructure, the knowledge can't be captured and it certainly can't be scaled. And it becomes invisible to the decision making. And then I also, when it comes to PLA and just like setting kind of all the different factors in this case, I just want to name out loud that I think there's this persistent fear that if we give credit away, we lose revenue. And so just to set the record straight there, do you want 11 enrollments if it takes 12 to get to a degree and you're rolling this credit for prior learning like up, the goal is to roll it up into a degree? Would you like 11 enrollments or would you like zero? Like, what do you want? And so ultimately, I think that the credit for prior learning, it's an entry point. It allows access and opportunity, and it helps people to get engaged and stay engaged. And I think that's really important, to just point out. So, so I think that this setting the stage of what we're trying to figure out is, again, this is repeating some of what's already been discussed, but decoupling enrollment from these like rigid academic terms and systems, and really designing an experience that is a coherent journey, and treating the learner and the learner data like an asset that follows them through so that it is seamless on the front end, and together we're working together collaboratively on the back end to sort all of these barriers out so that we can get folks who want to dip a toe in, allow them to get in the door, get the experience, have a good experience, see what's right for them, and then make a decision from there. So hopefully that provides kind of an interesting foundation for them, the rest of what we end up talking about.
Cindy, I really appreciate you giving us that case study and bringing up the issue of PLA. And I'm really happy that you named this idea that by introducing PLA, you're not going to be giving up enrollments. It actually can drive people through the funnel. I just have a quick question for you about this, and then we're gonna move on. Do you find, is it the same people who are trying to build an infrastructure for non-credit certificate programs and institution? Is that the same people who are working on PLA issues?
Uh, say it again.
Is it so the people who are trying to build an infrastructure for non-credit programs, for certificate programs, so we can track the data, are those same people the ones that are also trying to push a prior learning assessment, to bring that into our programs?
Yes,
It
yes,
is.
yes. For us, it is. Yeah, I don't know what your experience, or Peter, your experience with this, but on our end, yeah, it's the same group of people that are trying to figure out all of these different pathways. Honestly, I mean, there's quite a few. This is just one of them, but trying to open the pathways up for learners to be able to even get in, because we believe, and we have data to support this, that once folks are in, they have a good experience and then they tend to come back. And so it's really just about helping people to see that the learning experience is whatever the concern is, whatever the barrier is, if we can get them over that hurdle, then they do tend to come back and maybe take another non-credit course, or maybe they take a boot camp, or maybe they enroll in a credential, or and so, and it may not be a master's, but at the end of the day, I think that expanding learning and relationship building and building trust, I think honestly should be the one of the top priorities, just given the distrust that has been sowed over higher ed and just in general. I mean, we need to be focused on the most immediate and pressing pain point right now.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Appreciate that. All right, let's
Sure.
go. Let's get to some practical strategies because these guys actually have some practical strategies. Um, so here the first strategy is decoupling enrollment from the academic term. Peter, have you actually seen this done? And when you seen it done successfully, like what are the elements in place that allow an institution to or a school to go forward with that strategy?
Yeah, I think it's probably the most important strategy. It's a little bit of a sliding scale. Yeah, to go back to one of the questions we got, where it's, to not have data fragmentation, we still eventually need to get them back into that system of record if it's applicable. And absolutely. So I think the biggest thing, and there's one word on the slide that's doing all the heavy lifting, is that first bullet point, SAS remains a system of record. It's going to be a record. That's all that the old legacy SAS is going to get. A modern solution like a Salesforce type implementation is going to be your system of execution. So I think the legacy SIS isn't going away, and we can look at how that data needs to transform when you get to that integration strategy. But in the system of execution, look at starts, look at sessions, look at mini terms, look at parts, something like that. Like we did one implementation where they have a credential program starting every 5 weeks. So I forget if it was either Josh or Cindy, when you're saying, I want to take this credential, take this course in October. I don't want to wait until May. I want to do it now. So break up those cohorts, build brand new cohorts. But most importantly, that's going to happen in your system of execution, which in all likelihood, to get away from the super legacy rigid data structure, you're going to have to do that outside of your legacy SIS, outside of your system of record. And then whatever the SIS needs to function in order to award those credentials, bring them into degree seeking programs, whatever that lifetime of that data is, that's still going to get back to the SIS in some way. It's not going to be super representative of your modern data structure. Those data models are going to be in conflict constantly. There's going to be integration headaches, but it still needs to get there because they're still interacting. Most importantly, especially in our more commerce-oriented builds, those transactions need to get there. Those student ledger items need to get there. So everything's still going to get to the SIS, right? We're not just going to magically wave our wand and say, SIS is gone. We have an amazing new modern system top to bottom. We still need to operate within that reality where the system of record exists, but it's going to be just that. It's just going to be a record. And then that does lead into the second point about those enrollment experiences are upstream from that. It's going to be a really amazing form assembly form in a digital experience hosted on a Salesforce platform. And then at the end of that, all we're going to do is push a single enrollment record back to a legacy SIS. Awesome. You guys can control more of that experience because I keep going back to Cindy's original point. If it's not great, they're just going to leave. These modern learners have so much choice when it comes to it, is that we can't let the legacy SIS hold back these new implementations. But just as those new implementations can't fully exist without the legacy SIS, that record's still going to get there, right? We can't just pretend that system doesn't exist. But all your execution, your experience, everything else is going to be upstream from there. We're just going to check that box later on in the implementation.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, listening to you, I fully believe that like school can get in touch with you and this can be done from a technical standpoint if you get the resources. But Cindy, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking this is more an organizational change kind of thing, more a mindset issue, particularly outside of schools of professional studies. So can you speak a little bit about how you would go about making that mindset shift?
Yeah, for us, it was really about putting the learner first and really putting some serious data collection systems into place. And that was quite a process that started probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and it just takes a while to not just only get the systems on board, which is, some of what Peter's talking about, but to get the people on board and to get everyone trained up and understanding the why and the rationale for, why are we doing this, especially at a time where, everyone's firing on all cylinders, taking the time to stop and completely create all new workflows to start documenting things in different ways than you were doing before. You just it's a complete overhaul of the way that organizationally the way that you're working, and so really working hard to explain, like I say, the why behind it, and always putting the learner first, that this is going to help you to identify learner needs, be responsive to what the learner needs in that journey at all times, and data has to inform that. So I don't know that I answered your question, but I lost track of the question at this point. I got to talking about data and it all goes away. Um, but I guess my point is, um, it has to be, everyone has to be on board,
Yeah.
all hands on
Yeah.
deck, and everyone has to be aiming towards the same goal, so that, because the moment that one person or one team, particularly if it's somebody frontline that is learner facing, the moment one group is not on board and starts, having their effort be over on the side, everything breaks.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
All
totally.
right.
Yeah.
Let's keep going. So, Peter, I'm going to keep us going here because
No,
I
no,
want
you're
to
good.
get
You're good.
to
I'll circle back to it.
our other practical strategies. I want to get to the Q&A. So we're going to go a little bit quicker here. So strategy is to design continuing education like a consumer journey. So Peter, my question for you is, sounds great, but is this actually affordable for institutions? Like, can we actually afford to pay to do that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first question is, we have the what sucks meeting. So tell me everything that's terrible about your business. And then the second question is, all right, now let's scope it so that it's reasonable for you. I think the answer is most likely. Yeah, I don't want to be the guy that comes on and say, oh yeah, you guys can afford to do anything, right? We all exist within budget constrained environments, is what we've been calling them. And it's reality. So I think it's looking at, what does a phase one look like? What does a phase zero look like? Can we get some sort of accelerator out of the box to say, all right, we finally got the go ahead to do Education Cloud and Commerce on Core, layer in Form Assembly. Great, we got the licenses covered. Okay, what does implementation cost? Let's take it in a chunk and lower that time to value, because that's what all of your competitors are doing. These same consumer journeys that we all of us expect to have awesome e-commerce experiences wherever we go. So higher ed is no different. But it's, what does that phase zero look like? How do we get from zero to, all right, we are accepting enrollments, we are accepting applications, we're accepting purchases, that downstream automation's in place, and we can live with those purchases coming in while we finalize those integrations, because we're still executing, up here, upstream in those nicer systems. And that MVP product, once that's ready to go, that's where we've been able to bring forward some surprisingly affordable implementations, because we're not trying to please every single use case to everyone. To Cindy's earlier point, which I can now circle back to, is that change management is the biggest part of this. So if you don't try to completely migrate everyone off a legacy system, that, let's be honest, they might not hate, right? It's something they have to use for their job, but it might not be awful. So it's, all right, let's take something that's going to be more scalable, bring over a few teams at a time, just a few programs at a time, maybe just one program to start with, prove that out, get more value, and then that new revenue stream is what builds in the institutional support for the rest of it.
Yeah, okay, Cindy, I want to follow up with that is, So what Peter's saying, you can do it, but Cindy, I'm wondering what is the right unit of analysis, right? Yeah, unit of analysis at an institution to start with. Do you start with a school? Does it have to be institution-wide? If you're going to try to make it more like a consumer journey.
No, I totally agree with Peter that you need to start where you're going to have small wins. You know, small wins are going to be really, really important, particularly for from a cultural perspective, growing it out. And the moment people start to see the benefits of implementing these systems and having one source of truth, and then being able to iterate on that, then it starts to catch fire, right? And that's when you really start to see some cool things happen. So yeah, I mean, I think that it would be presumptuous for me to say, "Oh, this is the one thing that will," this is where. I mean, I think each institution or each unit, has to do some research for themselves and figure out like where that struggle is, or where they can impact the biggest change the most quickly. And then get a small group of people, like Peter said, on board and start to see those small wins and then grow from there.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go on to the next practical strategy because I think this builds on this. And this comes back to data. And Cindy, you wanted to talk about this. So, Cindy, I do want to ask you here if we're going to try to treat our data as a long-term asset, including our non-degree, non-matriculated learners, how do you balance the speed of doing this with the governance process that we usually go through to make big systematic changes?
Yeah, this is really tough, and I'm not going to lie. We've come into a fair amount of challenges with this. I think that speed without governance puts you in a position for a lot of risk. Governance without speed puts you in a situation where there's irrelevance. And the solution is really not about ignoring the rules. It's recognizing and designing around them, and being really intentional about where those where are the governance points that where are the policies, where, I mean, for us, a lot of things, sticky points, are situated within the registrar. And so collaborating, finding out who your champions are going to be within those places where there might be some resistance, and then figuring out together what coming to some shared goals, and then figuring out how you can move through that tension or that resistance while still honoring the fact that we do have rules that we have to follow, and we do have governance, and we can't get around that.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to strategy number 4 because I want to build on that. And Peter, I'm going to ask you on this for build for iteration and strategy. Where would you recommend an institution start? Because this seems like such a large issue to tackle. If we want to get into this and start to deal with this, where would you recommend we start to build for iteration?
Yeah, I think the most important part of the build phase is the pre-build phase. To exactly what Cindy just said, we have rules, we have regulations. We can't just go out and self-fund and do whatever we want. The registrar's office ultimately needs to get their data, and identify those champions will allow you to iterate once you actually get to that point. I think scope it down, right? Don't put out an RFP for a whole massive, we need a total overhaul of how we do continuing ed, right? Start with, let's take this one program, this one credential, this one course, even. As Cindy was mentioning, those small wins, people really can buy into the iteration once they see that first win. Is that everyone wants it, but no one wants to be the first, which is a much bigger issue in higher ed that we can talk about in a separate webinar. But that is identifying who can be the first and live with the very first implementation. How fast can they launch? So exactly how fast is fast? And then from there, again, don't try to do everything all at once. Start with a phase one, a phase zero, a phase point five, if you will, and look at how you can operate within that governance. Identify, we've had a lot of success, again, in the continuing ed lens of just a certain handful of programs. Maybe it's evening MBA and that's it. Or it's just not even a degree program. It's a PMP prep course. Let's put our PMP prep course, our SCM prep course, and an Amazon Web Services credential. Just put those three in there, right? These total non-traditional certificate-based, non-credit, non-degree, that data needs to go nowhere. For all intents and purposes, Central Campus doesn't even know these programs exist, but it's massive for the continuing ed revenue. So let's put just those over here and then see what happens. Okay, great. Those are a little bit lower stakes. Now let's look at a degree program and scale up from there. But it truly does tie together the budget, the internal champions, and then what can we actually get live with on what timeline to start seeing that return.
Yeah, I like that advice. All right, we have one more section to go for before we get into the Q&A. And Peter, this is you again. We're hoping that you could just give us kind of a real practical overview of the tech considerations as our institutions start to think about this organizational change management process.
Yeah, number one, mobile first has to be, even though it's the second bullet point, it's number one in our hearts. Right, 80 something percent of all web traffic is mobile now. It is for personally weird to think about people purchasing, applying for, getting into degree programs, certificate programs, college generally in the broad sense on their phone, but that's what's happening. So it has to absolutely be mobile first, scalable. It's got to be delightful. You've got to be able to use, whether it's a commerce platform, whether it's going through your application. This is where you can look at your recruitment system, look at that stack of, all right, how exactly, if I go and I turn around and want to apply to our programs, how many clicks does it take? How many different pages is it? How many times do you have to wait to submit something, have the integration run overnight to a legacy system to then get back the information you need? So can you submit everything all in one go? Right? This is where we leverage Form Assembly pretty often alongside Salesforce Education Cloud and Commerce Cloud to bring down that barrier, keep that ease up. So if they've logged in, we're not asking them for their information all over again. That integration is always the biggest one, right? Security and compliance kind of filter in everywhere in here. We've got to have compliant data collection. We've got to have compliant payment processing, but then connecting it back. But I would challenge those people that are structuring these projects and thinking about these projects is how much can we do before we have to send it on? Can we fully admit a student and then send them to the SIS? Do we need to then bring in every applicant? Is everyone that submits an RFI, should we just start an application for them and then send them a targeted marketing email to say, hey, you requested information. We gave you a call 5 minutes ago. We've actually already pre-filled all that information into an application. Just click here and continue. So I think it's removing that friction from the very top that we talked about. But the biggest tech consideration is 100% mobile.
Yeah. Okay. Agreed. All right. So let's just go into the wrap up, and then we have a quick poll, and then we're going to get to the Q&A. And I'll just quickly do this wrap up that all this resonates in my world, that this is not a side project. And certainly our learner expectations are evolving, and our institutions, we have to learn how to move faster and protect trust and keep our data as an asset. So this is definitely where we're living. All right, we have a quick poll question for you. So let's just ask that. Go ahead and launch that. And this is just so that folks can get back to you if you want to get some more information. So we'll just let this go for a few seconds, and then we'll get to the Q&A. Okay.
Yeah, we have some juicy questions.
Yeah, we have some. All right. So I think this is good. All right. So let's get to the Q&A. And again, the Form Assembly and other folks will get back to you if you would like to get more information. So there's lots of juicy questions, as Peter is saying. I'm going to sort of pick and choose the questions here, and thank you for asking the questions for all that folks are doing. One of the questions, and Cindy, this is going to go to you, is that there's a question about giving credit for certificate programs, and how important is this, and should schools be trying to prioritize this with all the governance complications that you get when you try to give credit. So how important is credit for certificate programs?
Um, I think I mean this is one of the reasons why we've been working on so hard on this, PLA and credit for prior learning. I think there needs to be the option there, that if those both of those pathways very much need to exist. Um, and that if even if somebody thinks, okay, I have zero interest in a credit bearing, degree or credential, people change their mind and they should be able to apply what it is that they have learned for credit, to then relieve that financial burden and make it easier. This is the way higher ed is going to survive and thrive looking into the future. Really being able to make it easy for people to be able to do that. So yeah, I absolutely think that there is, a need for credit credentials, and non-credit should flow seamlessly into that.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely does seem though like an organizational kind of mindset change at our institutions, which is challenging. I appreciate.
100%.
Yeah, all right, I appreciate the question. So, Peter, question for you that's coming across a number of times in the Q&A is the tension between the existing student information system, the existing SIS that was built really for matriculated students in credit-bearing programs, and the growth of these non-degree certificate programs, whether they're credit bearing or not. So, and what we're getting in the Q&A is it's often getting stuck in the conversation of should we be trying to add all this data to the existing SIS, or should we have a system that's built for certificates and continuing education? So, how would you address this, Peter?
Yeah, that is a tough one, because that's where you get the interdepartmental wars, that we refer to, where who owns what data is always the question to ask. I would say and push that if you can operate within your own system, but then still integrate back, that's probably the best environment, because we don't want to create a wonderful new system that becomes yet another fragment. If our data isn't ultimately connected back to central campus, those small wins stay within our group. And it's only going to be a small win for continuing ed and not the institution. And ultimately, proving out the case for a new scalable, flexible solution, it has to scale to the enterprise at a certain level. It's got to scale to the rest of the institution. So as much as I want to say, ignore the SIS, do your own thing, run your own instance of Salesforce, form assembly, everything else, that still has to be a consideration. But we found a lot of success with standing up a new, because in most cases, right, 72%, 82% of the people are not on Education Cloud, getting onto a newer version of Salesforce, whether it's Salesforce or whatever other CRM you're working with, spin up a new instance just to prove it out with continuing ed. Since you can usually get the budget approval internally, it's honestly not that expensive if you can structure your contract appropriately. Spin up that, work with central IT so that they can own the integration, they can own the downstream data. You know what you need on the execution part. We can get that stood up super fast. Central IT still feels ownership in the solution because they're integrating it back. And in that middle pit, that's where the transform probably happens to fit into that matriculated student system, because these other records that we're having aren't really going to fit. So it's not going to make sense to sort them into terms in your system of execution, but they'll eventually need to get there. So I'd say you need to approach it with a joint effort and say, we're going to innovate, we're going to be new, we're going to create an awesome system of execution for our people. Campus is still going to get their data because that's ultimately whatever they care about. Because yeah, we can't just become another fragment.
Yeah, Cindy, I want to give you a chance to jump into this because there's so many questions. Has that been your experience? Is the strategy that Peter's recommending and try to be holistic and see if you can integrate the existing SIS and be open-minded, or was that your experience as you've worked on these issues?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Peter is saying. Yeah,
All right,
absolutely.
all right. So
Yeah.
so so
And I
so
also have gotten totally sucked into some of these great questions that are coming in.
All right, so I'm going to try to bring together some of the questions in the Q&A, and obviously there's people are agreeing. So yeah, like this is coming, this is growing. It's kind of crazy the way we're doing it, but we really do have limitations of resources, of budget, and staff. And more than that, we're seeing like we don't have someone like Cindy at our in our schools who are actually expert about this, who can speak both sides, who can be bilingual in the academic side and actually the technical side. So Cindy, I'll ask you, since you can't work at all of our institutions,
Oh boy,
what
this is
advice?
loaded.
Yeah, I know it's a little bit loaded. What advice would you have for our institutions who don't have you, so we can start making progress?
Oh boy. Well, again, I mean, my positionality is really around, understanding learner needs by collecting the right data and not more data, and then putting the systems into place, to be able to meet those needs as quickly as you possibly can. And so understanding like the intent and the urgency of the learner, those two things I think are absolutely critical. What do they want to do and how fast do they want to do it? And then from there, like there's a whole host of if then scenarios that you can line up to make sure that you're meeting learners' needs in the way and on the timeline and with the relevance that they need. So I think those two those two data points are going to inform the pacing, the messaging, the pathway, the system that you're using, what teams are, what people are involved, and so the closer you can get to your learner, and this is something Peter and I have talked about at length. It might even be like the core of our relationship, our professional relationship is like discussing, the closer you can get to that learner and what they need and what is going on in their head, and then be able to be responsive and react to it. Um, that's just nirvana right there.
Okay. That would be Nirvana. I agree. All right, let's go on. Let's go on to the last slide of before you go. There's a lot here, and Peter, I just want to kind of give you just a minute to say, okay, we've listened to this. We know this is a big issue. Where should someone start if they're determined to kind of tackle this challenge that we're all facing?
It seems like the obvious answer is text Cindy, right? Get the playbook for working internally
That's what I'm
and,
thinking.
and align to those stakeholders, right? Exactly. No, I think to kind of put a bow on everything, right? We talked about the issues, talked about the approaches. Define the smallest needle mover you can, right? What does a new revenue stream, right? It doesn't have to be a 7-figure revenue stream out of the gate. How can we move the needle for continuing ed? And then seek the technology to follow that. Because I think a lot of people fall into the trap of looking at a snazzy demo and going, yep, I want all of that. And that doesn't really work for them. So the technology, I mean, we're Salesforce consultants, we're going to recommend Salesforce. But I think a technology stack of education cloud, layering on commerce on core, adding in key software vendors like Form Assembly to have those better formatted data collection experiences, is look at what does all that mean to us? How is that moving the needle internally? Who are our champions that can get behind that and support that internally? And I think there's ways to go about it so that your contract isn't a super bloated 5-year deal. Is your technology can grow incrementally with the implementation partner you bring in, with the programs that you bring onto the platform. So there's a lot of ways to kind of scale everything, because you don't want to just scale costs right away to bring in this tiny little needle mover. Those have to scale as well. But yeah, I think it's define what is the smallest amount of impact we can have. Let's pursue that. Let's prove that out. Show it to everyone else.
I like that advice. Okay, I'm going to end. First, I'm going to end by thanking Peter and Cindy and thanking Inside Higher Ed and Form Assembly. I'm going to say that I'm going to be clicking on the links there in the chat to get a demo, because this is an issue. I'm going to be contacting Peter, and I'm going to be inviting Cindy to our campus to try to actually talk about what's happened. This has been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank all of you Cindy and Peter, thank you for your expertise.
Thank you.
And thank you, Josh.
Yeah, I want to thank
Thanks, Josh.
everyone in the audience for joining us, and have a good afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you to Insider Higher Ed.
Thanks, everybody.
Assembly. Thanks, everybody.
Yes,
Bye.
absolutely.